Bear cub was about to fall into a shredder. What this baby did was shocking. Let us know where you're watching from. If you love my content, consider supporting it with a super thanks. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe. It'll help us to remain in touch with amazing people like you. The morning sun filtered through the towering pines, casting dappled shadows across the weathered exterior of Dawson's mill. Nestled at the edge of Whispering Pine Forest, the sawmill had been a fixture in the small town of Riverbrook for generations. The scent of fresh sawdust hung in the air, mingling with the earthy aroma of the surrounding wilderness. Thaddeus Dawson wiped the sweat from his brow as he surveyed the day's work. His calloused hands bore the marks of decades spent transforming raw timber into lumber that built the homes and lives of Riverbrook's residents. At 62, his once dark hair had faded to silver, but his eyes still held the sharp clarity of a man who knew his craft well. "Eli, check the feed on the eastern belt," Thaddeus called over the rhythmic hum of machinery. The massive wood shredder, a recent addition to the mill, roared to life, its metal teeth gleaming with dangerous promise. The machine could reduce whole logs to chips in minutes, feeding the growing demand for processed wood products from the city beyond the mountains. Eli Westbrook, a lanky 19-year-old with perpetually tousled auburn hair, nodded and moved toward the eastern section of the mill. His steps were quick but careful. 6 months at Dawson's mill had taught him to respect the power of the machines that surrounded him. Half a mile away, in a modest cabin perched on a gentle slope overlooking the mill, Clara Bennett rocked gently in a wooden chair on the porch. Her 8-month-old daughter, Lily, cooed softly in her arms. Clara's husband, Marcus, had been working at the mill for nearly 2 years now, providing a stable income for their little family. "Look, sweetie," Clara whispered, pointing toward a family of deer emerging from the trees near their cabin. "Aren't they beautiful?" Lily's wide blue eyes tracked the movement, her tiny fingers reaching out as if to touch the distant creatures. A small smile bloomed on her cherubic face, revealing 2 tiny teeth that had just broken through her gums. Clara kissed her daughter's soft curls. "Your daddy will be home soon. He's just down there, making sure we have everything we need." She gestured toward the mill, where the faint sounds of machinery drifted up the hillside. Unknown to the humans going about their morning routines, deeper in the forest, a mother black bear named Luna, by local wildlife researchers, was teaching her cubs the delicate art of finding food. The 2 cubs, one male and one female, were in their 4th month of life, curious and playful as they explored the world beyond their den. The female cub, with a distinctive white patch on her chest, stayed close to her mother, attentively watching as Luna demonstrated how to dig for grubs and roots. But her brother, more adventurous and slightly larger, kept wandering off, drawn by new scents and sounds that beckoned from beyond the familiar territory. Luna huffed, calling her wayward son back for the 3rd time that morning. The male cub reluctantly returned, but his attention remained focused on something beyond the trees. The strange, mechanical sounds emanating from the human structure he'd never seen before. As Luna moved deeper into the forest with her daughter, searching for the sweet berries that grew near the small stream, the male cub seized his opportunity. With one last glance at his distracted mother, he slipped away, following the intriguing sounds and smells that promised new discoveries. Back at the mill, Marcus Bennett loaded another log onto the conveyor belt. At 32, he had the strong build of a man accustomed to physical labor. His dark hair was cut short for practicality, and a well-trimmed beard framed his determined face. He'd moved to Riverbrook with Clara 3 years ago, seeking a quieter life after years in the city had worn them both down. "Marcus, take your break," Thaddeus called out. "You've been at it since dawn." Marcus nodded gratefully, setting down his tools. Think I'll head up to the cabin, check on Clara and Lily." Thaddeus smiled, the wrinkles around his eyes deepening. Give that little girl a kiss from her honorary grandpa. As Marcus prepared to leave, Eli came rushing over, his face flushed with excitement. "Mr. Dawson, there's a call from Turner's Hardware. They've doubled their order for the processed chips. They need it by Friday." Thaddeus frowned. "That's a tight schedule, but we might manage if we run the shredder through lunch." He turned to Marcus. "Sorry, son. Mind delaying that break? We could use every hand." Marcus hesitated, thinking of Clara and Lily waiting at the cabin. "I promised Clara I'd check in, but I can make it quick. Back in 15. Thaddeus nodded. "That'll work. We'll get the bigger logs ready for when you return." As Marcus headed up the hill path toward his cabin, the curious bear cub had finally reached the edge of the forest. He paused at the tree line, his small black nose twitching with the unfamiliar sense of humans and machinery. The loud sounds frightened him, but his curiosity proved stronger than his fear. With cautious steps he ventured out, staying low to the ground as he approached the strange structure where humans moved about. The scent of sawdust was strongest near a large pile of wood chips, and the hungry cub made his way toward it, hoping to find something interesting to eat. Up at the cabin, Clara had just laid Lily down on a blanket on the porch. The day had warmed considerably, and the shade of the cabin's overhang provided a perfect spot for the baby to play, while Clara hung laundry on the nearby line. "Look who's coming up the path," Clara said to Lily, spotting Marcus making his way up the hill. She waved, and Marcus quickened his pace, a smile spreading across his face at the sight of his family. "Just a quick visit," Marcus explained as he reached the cabin, sweeping Clara into a quick embrace. "We got a big order. Thaddeus needs all hands." He crouched beside Lily, who squealed with delight and reached for him. "There's my little wildflower." Clara watched them with a tender smile. "We're fine here. The day is beautiful and Lily's been an angel." Marcus nodded, savoring the moment of peace with his family. "I should be done by 5. Then it's just us for the evening." Back at the mill, the bear cub had grown bolder. Finding nothing edible in the pile of wood chips, he continued to explore, drawing closer to the main building where the machinery rumbled and whirred. The workers, focused on their tasks and unaccustomed to wildlife venturing so close, remained oblivious to the small intruder. Eli had moved to the southern conveyor belt, adjusting its speed to accommodate the larger logs that would soon be processed. The shredder loomed nearby, its metal teeth temporarily idle but ready to roar back to life at the push of a button. The curious cub, now just yards from the main mill floor, spotted a small puddle of something shiny near the conveyor belt. Oil that had leaked from one of the machines glistened in the sunlight, catching the cub's attention. He moved closer, drawn by the unusual sight. Up at the cabin, Marcus reluctantly prepared to head back to work. "I'll see you both tonight," he promised, kissing Clara and then Lily, who grabbed at his beard with delighted fingers. As Marcus started back down the path, Clara returned to her laundry, glancing occasionally at Lily, who had rolled onto her stomach and was now pushing herself up, practicing the movements that would soon lead to crawling. None of them could have anticipated how the peaceful routine of their day was about to be shattered, or how the curious wanderings of a bear cub would soon collide with their lives in a way that would test the boundaries between the wild and the human world. The stage was set for an encounter that would leave the residents of Riverbrook questioning everything they thought they knew about the divide between humans and the wilderness that surrounded them. An encounter that would begin with a baby's intuition and a cub's misplaced curiosity, culminating in a moment so extraordinary that those who witnessed it would speak of it in hushed, wondering tones for years to come. As Marcus disappeared down the hill path, Clara hummed softly while pinning a white sheet to the clothesline. The gentle breeze carried the scent of wild honeysuckle from the nearby bushes, and birds called to one another from the surrounding trees. It was the kind of perfect spring day that made Clara grateful for their decision to leave the city behind. Lily had managed to push herself up onto her hands and knees, rocking back and forth on the blanket spread across the porch. Her determination was visible in the slight furrow of her brow, a mirror image of her father's expression when he concentrated on a task. Clara glanced over and smiled at the sight. "Look at you, my strong girl," she encouraged. "You'll be crawling before we know it." Down at the mill, Marcus rejoined the team, rolling up his sleeves as Thaddeus outlined the plan to meet their deadline. "We'll process the large pine logs first," Thaddeus explained, pointing to the stack of freshly cut timber. "Eli will manage the intake. I'll monitor the shredder, and Marcus, you and Rowan handle the outflow and packaging." Rowan Chen, a stocky man in his 40s with a perpetual 5 o'clock shadow, nodded from where he was adjusting the collection bins. Originally from Seattle, Rowan had moved to Riverbrook 5 years earlier, after a divorce had left him seeking a fresh start. His expertise with machinery had quickly made him indispensable at the mill. "Should have brought more coffee," Rowan muttered, glancing at his empty thermos. "Going to be a long day." As the men prepared for the increased workload, the bear cub continued his exploration. The puddle of oil had proven disappointing, not at all the sweet-smelling substance he had hoped for. Undeterred, he followed his nose toward another promising scent. The remnants of Eli's lunch, a sandwich wrapped in wax paper that protruded slightly from a backpack hanging on a hook near the wall. The cub's approach went unnoticed as the workers focused on their tasks. The machinery roared back to life, the conveyor belt beginning its steady movement as Eli guided the first of the large logs into position. The rhythmic clank and whir of the mill provided a constant backdrop of sound that obscured the soft padding of the cub's paws on the sawdust-covered floor. Meanwhile, in the depths of the forest, Luna had finally noticed her son's absence. The mother bear huffed anxiously, her daughter cub close at her side as she retraced their path, sniffing for her missing offspring's scent. Her powerful nose soon caught his trail, and alarm rippled through her as she realized the direction he had taken, toward the human settlement and its strange, threatening smells. Luna quickened her pace, her protective instincts in full force. The female cub struggled to keep up with her mother's urgent movements, sensing the danger even without understanding its nature. Back at the cabin, Clara had just finished hanging the laundry when she noticed Lily had become unusually still. The baby had stopped her rocking motion and was now sitting upright, her gaze fixed intently down the hill toward the mill. Clara followed her daughter's line of sight, but saw nothing unusual. Just the familiar outline of the mill with its tall stacks and the thin plume of smoke rising from the main building. "What do you see, sweetheart?" Clara asked, crouching beside Lily. The baby made no sound but continued to stare, her expression unnervingly serious for one so young. A sudden chill ran down Clara's spine despite the warmth of the day. She'd heard stories of babies and animals sensing things that adults couldn't perceive. Old wives' tales, her mother would have called them. Yet the intensity of Lily's focus was unsettling. At the mill, disaster was brewing. The curious cub had finally reached Eli's backpack and was attempting to extract the sandwich with his claws when the hook gave way. The backpack tumbled to the floor with a thud, startling the cub and catching Eli's attention. "What the—" Eli turned, his eyes widening as he spotted the small black bear. "Mr. Dawson, there's a bear in the mill!" The sudden shout startled the cub, who bolted in panic, running deeper into the mill rather than toward the exit. In his terror, he scrambled onto the nearest elevated surface, the very conveyor belt that was steadily moving massive logs toward the shredder. "Cut the power!" Thaddeus yelled, lunging for the main control panel. But in the chaos, Rowan, who hadn't seen the cub, misinterpreted the command. Thinking there was an issue with the wood flow, he increased the speed of the belt instead of shutting it down. "No, the main power," Thaddeus clarified, his voice nearly lost in the suddenly accelerated roar of the machinery. The cub slipped on the moving belt, his small claws failing to find purchase on the smooth metal surface. As he tumbled and slid, the belt carried him inexorably toward the waiting maw of the shredder, its massive metal teeth spinning with lethal purpose. Marcus was the first to spot the cub's dire situation. "The shredder! There's a bear cub on the belt!" he shouted, already running toward the emergency stop button located on the far side of the machine. Time seemed to slow as the workers realized what was happening. The cub let out a terrified yelp, the sound piercingly clear even above the industrial noise. The shredder loomed closer, its mechanical hunger indifferent to the life that was about to be fed into its grasp. Up at the cabin, Lily suddenly began to wail, not her usual cry of hunger or discomfort, but a sound so urgent and distressed that Clara immediately scooped her up, checking for injury. "What's wrong, baby? Are you hurt?" Clara asked frantically, but Lily continued to cry, her tiny body rigid as she pointed down toward the mill, tears streaming down her reddened face. Clara's maternal instinct surged. Something was wrong, terribly wrong. Without stopping to analyze the irrational impulse, she grabbed the lily and began to hurry down the path toward the mill, her heart pounding with inexplicable dread. At the forest's edge, Luna had picked up speed, charging through the underbrush with single-minded determination. The scent of her cub was stronger now, mixed with the alarming smells of humans and their machines. Her powerful muscles propelled her forward, the female cub struggling to keep pace behind her. Inside the mill, chaos reigned. Marcus was still several yards from the emergency stop, his path blocked by a stack of processed lumber. Thaddeus was shouting instructions that went unheard in the mechanical din. Eli had frozen in place, horror etched on his young face as he watched the cub's desperate struggle. Rowan, finally understanding the situation, was frantically trying to reverse the belt's direction, but the control panel was responding sluggishly to his commands. The cub had managed to turn himself around, facing away from the shredder, but this only meant he couldn't see the danger that awaited him. His back paws slipped off the edge of the belt, briefly catching on a small tear in the metal before losing their grip entirely. He was now barely 2 yards from the shredder's intake, the distance closing with each passing second. Outside the mill, Clara had reached the bottom of the hill path. Lily's cries had intensified, and she was straining in her mother's arms, leaning toward the mill entrance with such force that Clara struggled to hold her. "Marcus," Clara called out, but her voice was lost in the industrial cacophony. Then, in a moment that would later defy explanation, Lily's crying abruptly stopped. The baby's body went completely still in Clara's arms, her blue eyes wide and focused. Before Clara could react, Lily drew a deep breath and let out a sound that was neither a cry nor a word. A clear, piercing tone that seemed to cut through all other noise like a knife through water. The sound penetrated the mill, causing every man inside to pause momentarily. Even the machinery seemed to hesitate, though that was surely an illusion born of the moment's intensity. In that fraction of a second's pause, Marcus spotted the clear path to the emergency stop. He lunged forward, his hand slamming down on the large red button with all the force he could muster. The response was immediate. The conveyor belt juddered to a halt, the shredder's roar diminishing to a low grumble before silence fell over the mill. The cub, mere inches from the machine's teeth, lay trembling on the now stationary belt, too terrified to move. The sudden silence was broken by a much more terrifying sound, the deep, throaty growl of an adult bear. Luna had arrived at the mill's open loading bay, her massive form silhouetted against the daylight, fury and fear emanating from her in palpable waves. "Nobody move," Thaddeus whispered, his eyes locked on the mother bear. "Don't make any sudden movements." Clara stood frozen at the mill entrance, Lily clutched tightly to her chest. The baby had gone quiet again, but her gaze remained fixed on the scene before them. The terrified cub, the growling mother, and the four men caught in a tableau of suspended danger. What happened next would change the lives of everyone present. Luna took a step into the mill, her growl deepening as she assessed the situation. Her cub remained paralyzed on the belt, separated from her by the width of the mill floor and four humans who stood between them. In Clara's arms, Lily began to squirm insistently. Before anyone could react, the baby made a sound. Not the piercing tone from before, but a soft cooing, almost like a gentle humming. It was barely audible, yet somehow it carried across the tense silence of the mill. The mother bear's ears twitched. Her growl faltered as she turned her massive head toward the sound. Her eyes, dark and intelligent, found Lily's blue ones across the distance. For a breathless moment, something inexplicable passed between them. The human infant and the wild predator. A connection that transcended species, language, and the natural order of things. Then, to everyone's astonishment, Luna's aggressive posture softened. Her growl faded to a low rumble, then ceased entirely. She remained alert, her eyes never leaving Lily's, but the immediate threat of attack had mysteriously diminished. "Clara," Marcus whispered, not daring to move, "take Lily and back away slowly." But Clara found herself unable to comply. Something held her in place. The same intuition that had brought her running down the hill. The same inexplicable force that seemed to be guiding her daughter's unusual behavior. "Wait," she whispered back. "Just wait." Lily continued her soft cooing, the sound weaving a spell of calm through the charged atmosphere. And then, to the amazement of every adult present, the baby extended one tiny hand toward the mother bear in a gesture that seemed almost like welcome. Luna watched the baby's movement with acute attention. Then, after what seemed an eternity, but was likely only seconds, she made a sound of her own. A low, rumbling chuff that bear researchers would recognize as a sound mothers make to reassure their cubs. The response was immediate. The cub on the conveyor belt raised his head, his terror momentarily overcome by the familiar call of his mother. He scrambled to his feet, still wobbly, but now animated by hope. "We need to help the cub get to his mother," Clara said softly, her voice steady despite the hammer of her heart. "That's what Lily is trying to tell us." Marcus looked at his wife as if she had lost her mind. "Clara, that's a wild bear. We can't—" "Look at them," Clara interrupted, nodding toward Luna and Lily, who remained locked in their improbable connection. "Just look." Indeed, the scene before them defied all conventional wisdom about wild animal behavior. Luna was now sitting on her haunches, her aggressive posture completely gone, though her eyes remained vigilant. The bear cub had managed to turn around on the belt, but seemed unsure how to get down from his precarious perch. And Lily, still cradled in her mother's arms, continued her gentle cooing, her hand extended, her expression serene in a way that seemed impossible for an infant her age. "I've never seen anything like it," Thaddeus murmured, his weathered face slack with wonder. Eli, who had been frozen near the control panel, quietly asked, "What do we do, Mr. Dawson?" Thaddeus hesitated. trapped between his knowledge of wild animal danger and the inexplicable calm that had settled over the mill. Finally, he made a decision. "Rowan," he said softly, "you're closest to the belt controls. Can you lower the incline on the eastern section? Make a gentle slope for the cub to walk down?" Rowan nodded, his movements deliberately slow as he reached for the control panel. With painstaking care, he adjusted a lever, and the section of the belt nearest the cub began to tilt downward, creating a ramp to the floor. The cub, sensing the change beneath his paws, crouched lower, uncertain. Luna made another soft chuffing sound, and the cub's ears perked up. With cautious steps, he began to navigate the declining belt, his movements becoming more confident as he approached level ground. As the cub reached the floor, every human in the mill held their breath. The small bear paused, glancing around at the strange environment, seemingly disoriented by the unfamiliar surfaces and smells. Then Lily made a new sound, a soft babble that somehow contained a note of encouragement. The cub's head swiveled toward her, his round ears forward with interest. To everyone's amazement, the cub took a hesitant step in Lily and Clara's direction, rather than toward his mother. Luna tensed but did not move from her position. Her eyes tracked her cub's progress with maternal vigilance, but she made no attempt to call him back or advance to retrieve him. "Don't move," Marcus whispered to Clara, but again she felt guided by something beyond rational thought. "It's okay," she soothed, as much to the anxious men as to the animals before them. "Lily knows what she's doing." The words would have sounded absurd in any other context, attributing knowing intention to an 8-month-old baby. Yet, in that extraordinary moment, no one thought to question it. The bear cub continued his approach, each step more confident than the last. When he was about 10 feet from Clara and Lily, he paused again, his small black nose working overtime as he processed their scent. Lily's cooing changed in pitch, becoming almost melodic. She leaned forward in her mother's arms, her hand still extended, fingers splayed as if in invitation. The cub sat back on his haunches, mirroring his mother's posture. For a tense moment, he simply watched the strange human cub that made such interesting sounds. Then, in a movement so natural it seemed choreographed, the bear cub rose and closed the remaining distance. He stopped just short of Clara's feet, looking up at Lily with unmistakable curiosity. Clara's arms trembled with the effort of remaining still. Every instinct warned her to back away, to protect her child from the wild animal that now sat barely a yard away. Yet Lily showed no fear, only that same serene interest that had characterized her behavior throughout this impossible encounter. From her position near the loading bay, Luna watched attentively but made no move to interfere. The female cub had finally caught up to her mother and now peeked around Luna's bulk, equally captivated by the unfolding scene. What happened next would become the stuff of local legend, retold in Riverbrook for generations to come. Lily, with the innocence and fearlessness that only a baby could possess, leaned down from her mother's arms. Before Clara could tighten her grip, Lily extended her small hand and touched the top of the bear cub's head with gentle fingers. A collective gasp filled the mill. Marcus took an involuntary step forward, but froze when Luna huffed sharply in warning. The bear cub didn't flinch from Lily's touch. Instead, he leaned into it, much as he might lean into his mother's grooming. His round eyes closed briefly in what appeared to be contentment. Lily giggled, a sound so normal, so childlike, that it broke the spell of tension that had gripped the adults. The bear cub's ears twitched at the sound, and he made a soft wuffling noise in response. "Well, I'll be damned," Thaddeus breathed, his voice barely audible. For nearly a minute, the tableau held. the baby, human, gently patting the bear cub, Clara holding her daughter with trembling arms, the mother bear watching with inscrutable patience, and 4 men standing in mute witness to something none of them could have imagined possible. Then, as if responding to some signal imperceptible to the humans present, the bear cub backed away from Lily's touch. He turned and trotted across the mill floor toward his waiting mother, his earlier fear apparently forgotten. Luna rose to her full height as her son reached her. She nuzzled him briefly, confirming his safety with maternal thoroughness, then turned her attention back to the humans, particularly to Clara and Lily. The mother bear's gaze was penetrating, intelligence and something harder to define evident in her dark eyes. She made no sound, but her scrutiny was palpable, assessing the strange human mother and cub who had somehow intervened in her family's crisis. After what seemed an eternity, Luna dipped her head in what could only be described as acknowledgement. Then, with a nudge to both her cubs, she turned and padded out of the mill, her offspring following close behind. The humans remained frozen until the bears had disappeared into the tree line. Then, as if a switch had been flipped, they erupted into motion and sound. "Clara!" Marcus rushed to his wife and daughter, gathering them both in a fierce embrace. "Are you all right? I can't believe what just happened. Did you see that?" Eli was practically shouting, his earlier terror transformed into wild excitement. The baby touched a bear. A wild bear. Rowan simply stood shaking his head, his usual stoicism cracked by disbelief. In all my years... Thaddeus approached Clara, Marcus, and Lily slowly, his weathered face a mask of wonder. "I've lived alongside these woods for 62 years, he said quietly. "Never, not once, have I seen anything like what just happened." Clara looked down at Lily, who had returned to her usual baby self, grabbing at her mother's hair, babbling nonsense sounds. Her earlier otherworldly calm completely vanished. "I don't understand it," Clara admitted. It was like she knew, like she could somehow communicate with them. "She saved that cub's life," Marcus said, gently touching his daughter's cheek. "If she hadn't made that sound when she did, I wouldn't have seen the path to the emergency stop in time." "It's more than that," Thaddeus said thoughtfully. "That mother bear should have torn through all of us to get to her cub. Nothing stops a mother bear protecting her young. Nothing except what we just saw." The group fell silent, the enormity of what they had witnessed settling over them like a blanket of snow, transforming the familiar landscape of their understanding into something new and unexplored. Clara felt Lily's weight in her arms, so normal and yet suddenly mysterious. What had happened here? What hidden connection had her daughter accessed that allowed her to bridge the divide between human and wild in a way that defied explanation? As if sensing her mother's thoughts, Lily looked up at Clara with her clear blue eyes. For a moment, Clara glimpsed something ancient and knowing in her daughter's gaze, a wisdom that seemed to transcend her infant limitations. Then Lily smiled, revealing her 2 tiny teeth, and the impression vanished, leaving only a normal, healthy baby girl. "We should get back to the cabin," Clara said softly. "It's been quite a day." As the group began to disperse, each person lost in their own thoughts about what they had witnessed. None of them noticed the large black raven perched on the mill's roof edge. The bird had observed the entire encounter with unblinking eyes that reflected an intelligence far beyond that of an ordinary corvid. As Clara, Marcus, and Lily started up the path toward their cabin, the raven spread its glossy wings and launched into flight. It circled once over the mill, then headed deeper into the forest, following the path that Luna and her cubs had taken. Deep in the woods, where ancient trees grew so close together that sunlight barely penetrated to the forest floor, The raven descended to a moss-covered clearing. In the center stood a formation of stones arranged in a circle, their surfaces etched with symbols older than human memory. The raven landed on the largest stone and waited, its feathers gleaming with an iridescence that seemed to shift between natural black and something else, something that caught and reflected colors that had no name in human language. Minutes passed, and then a shadowy figure emerged from between the trees, tall and slender, with features that seemed to blur when viewed directly. The figure approached the stone circle with silent steps. "So it has begun," the figure said, its voice neither male nor female, but somehow both and neither. "The child has awakened." The raven bobbed its head in what might have been agreement, then opened its beak and spoke, not with a bird's harsh caw, but with words as clear as any human's. "Sooner than expected," the raven replied. "The convergence accelerates." The figure nodded, reaching out a long-fingered hand to stroke the raven's glossy head. "The mother suspects nothing?" "She senses, but does not know," the raven answered. "The father is blind to it entirely. Only the old human, the one with silver hair, he has seen such things before, though he has forgotten. And the bears? The mother bear understands more than the humans. She will remember, and she will return when the time comes." The figure was silent for a moment, contemplating this information. Then it spoke again, its voice rustling like leaves in a midnight breeze. "Watch over the child. The gift is rare, and there are those who would sense its presence and seek to exploit it, or extinguish it." The raven's eyes gleamed with an unnatural intelligence. "And the convergence?" "Approaches with each passing day," the figure replied. "The veil between worlds grows thinner. The child may be key to what comes next." With a nod that seemed to encompass understanding beyond words, the raven spread its wings once more and took flight, rising above the ancient trees and banking toward the distant outline of Riverbrook. Behind it, the shadowy figure melted back into the forest, leaving no trace of its presence except a faint shimmer in the air, like heat rising from sun-warmed stone. Back at their cabin, Clara settled Lily into her crib for an afternoon nap. The baby had fallen asleep on the walk up from the mill, the excitement of the day apparently taking its toll on her small body. Clara stood watching her daughter sleep, marveling at how peaceful and ordinary she looked. Had she imagined the strange connection between Lily and the bears? The knowing look in her baby's eyes. Marcus entered the bedroom quietly, coming to stand beside his wife. "Thaddeus closed the mill for the day," he said softly. "No one's much in the mood for work after that." Clara nodded, her eyes still on Lily's sleeping form. "What do you think happened down there, Marcus?" "Really happened?" Marcus shook his head slowly. "I don't know. If I hadn't seen it with my own eyes." He trailed off, then continued more firmly. "But I did see it. We all did. Somehow, our daughter connected with those bears in a way that shouldn't be possible." "She knew," Clara whispered. "Before we even went down to the mill, she knew something was wrong. That's why she was staring, why she started crying. She knew that cub was in danger." Marcus put his arm around Clara's shoulders, drawing her close. "My grandmother used to tell stories," he said hesitantly. "Old stories from her homeland about children born with special gifts. Connections to the natural world, to animals, to things beyond ordinary understanding." Clara looked up at her husband, surprised. Marcus had always been practical, skeptical of anything that couldn't be logically explained. "You never mentioned those stories before?" "Because I never believed them," Marcus admitted. "They were just old tales, the kind that get passed down through generations but don't mean anything in the real world." He glanced at Lily, his expression softening. At least, that's what I thought until today. Outside their window, unseen by either parent, the black raven settled on a nearby branch. It cocked its head, listening to their conversation with unnatural attention. "What do we do now?" Clara asked, voicing the question that hung between them. Marcus was quiet for a long moment. "I don't know," he finally answered honestly. "But whatever this is, whatever gift Lily might have, we need to protect her. The world isn't always kind to things it doesn't understand." Clara nodded, a mixture of wonder and trepidation filling her heart as she gazed at her sleeping daughter. "Do you think it will happen again?" Before Marcus could answer, a soft tap came at their window. Both parents turned to see the raven perched on the sill, its dark eyes fixed on them with unsettling intelligence. "That's odd," Marcus murmured, moving closer to the window. "Ravens don't usually come this close to people." As he approached, the raven did not fly away. Instead, it tapped the glass again with its beak, deliberately, as if demanding entry. In her crib, Lily stirred, her eyes fluttering open. She turned her head toward the window, and upon seeing the raven, broke into a delighted smile. She reached out with one small hand, just as she had reached for the bear cub hours earlier. The raven bobbed its head in what looked disturbingly like a greeting. Clara and Marcus exchanged a glance, the same thought reflected in both their expressions. Whatever had begun in the mill that day was far from over. In fact, it might be just the beginning of something beyond their wildest imaginings, something that would change not only their lives, but perhaps the very relationship between the human world and the wilderness that surrounded them. And at the center of it all, gurgling happily in her crib, was their daughter, ordinary and extraordinary, innocent and knowing, a bridge between worlds that should never have been able to meet. The raven tapped the glass a third time, more insistently, and somewhere deep in the forest, in a circle of ancient stones, shadows stirred with anticipation of what was to come. Marcus hesitated, his hand hovering near the window latch. "I don't think we should open it," he said quietly to Clara. "There's something not right about this bird." Clara nodded, drawing closer to Lily's crib protectively. The raven continued to stare, unblinking, its gaze shifting between the parents and their child with unnerving precision. Then, suddenly, the bird spread its wings and launched itself from the windowsill. Instead of flying away, however, it circled the cabin once, twice, 3 times, before perching on the roof directly above Lily's room. The rhythmic sound of talons scraping against wooden shingles drifted down to them. "It's like it's standing guard," Clara whispered, her voice a mixture of wonder and apprehension. In her crib, Lily had returned to her usual baby behavior, babbling happily and reaching for the mobile that hung above her. The uncanny awareness she had displayed earlier seemed to have vanished completely. Marcus ran a hand through his hair, his practical mind struggling to process the day's events. "I'm going to talk to Thaddeus," he decided. He mentioned something about having seen things before. Maybe he knows more than he's letting on. Clara looked up sharply. "What do you mean?" The way he reacted at the mill. Surprised, yes, but not as shocked as the rest of us. And that comment about having lived alongside these woods for 62 years. Marcus shook his head. "I've worked with the man for almost 2 years. He's never talked about anything unusual until today." Clara considered this, absently stroking Lily's soft curls. "Do you think he might have answers?" "I don't know," Marcus admitted, "but right now he's the only lead we have." After ensuring that Clara and Lily would be safe, though what safe meant in this new reality, neither of them was quite sure, Marcus headed back down the hill toward Thaddeus's home. a modest cabin located just beyond the mill. As he walked, Marcus couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. The forest, that had always seemed so peaceful now, held an air of mystery, as if the trees themselves had secrets to whisper. Several times he paused, certain he had glimpsed movement among the shadows, only to find nothing when he looked more closely. Above him, a dark shape glided silently through the air, the raven following his progress with unwavering attention. Thaddeus lived alone in a cabin that predated most of Riverbrook's other structures. Built by his grandfather nearly a century earlier, the dwelling bore the marks of generations of careful maintenance and expansion. Unlike the more modern homes in town, Thaddeus's cabin had been constructed with a deep respect for the surrounding forest, as if designed to exist in harmony with the wilderness rather than in defiance of it. As Marcus approached, he noticed several unusual features he had overlooked during previous visits. Strange symbols had been carved into the wooden posts that supported the porch roof. Designs that resembled no alphabet Marcus recognized, but nonetheless gave the impression of meaning, of language. Wind chimes fashioned from antlers, feathers, and what looked like small bones hung at irregular intervals around the property, creating a subtle music as the breeze moved through them. The door opened before Marcus could knock, revealing Thaddeus in the entrance. The older man looked unsurprised to see him. "I've been expecting you," Thaddeus said simply, stepping aside in invitation. "Come in. I imagine you have questions." The interior of the cabin was warm and cluttered but not disorganized. Every surface held evidence of a life lived in close connection to the natural world. Shelves of polished stones and dried plants, walls adorned with intricate wreaths woven from various barks and fibers, tables covered with books whose titles Marcus couldn't quite make out. A fire burned low in a stone hearth, filling the room with the sweet scent of pine resin. "Sit." Thaddeus gestured to a chair near the hearth, then moved to a cabinet made of darkly stained wood. From it, he retrieved a bottle and 2 small glasses. "You look like you could use this." Marcus accepted the offered drink, a honey-colored liquid that burned pleasantly as it went down, and waited as Thaddeus settled into a chair opposite him. "What happened today?" Marcus began, uncertain how to phrase his questions without sounding ridiculous. "With Lily and the bears, something rare," Thaddeus replied, his weathered face solemn in the firelight. "Something I've seen only twice before in all my years." "You've seen this before?" Marcus leaned forward, hope and dread mingling in his chest. "Children communicating with wild animals?" Thaddeus took a sip from his glass, his eyes distant with memory. "The first time was when I was just a boy, no more than 7. There was a girl in Riverbrook then. Eliza Mercer was her name. Sweet child, always singing to herself. One winter, a pack of wolves came down from the high country, driven by hunger. People were scared, keeping their children close, their livestock closer." He paused, running a thumb along the rim of his glass. "Eliza wandered off during a snowstorm. Her parents were frantic. The whole town searched for hours. When they found her..." Thaddeus shook his head slowly. "She was curled up asleep in a hollow log, surrounded by the wolf pack. Not a mark on her. The wolves had sheltered her from the storm, kept her warm with their bodies." Marcus stared, his drink forgotten in his hand. "What happened to her? To Eliza?" A shadow passed over Thaddeus's face. "Her family left Riverbrook within a month. Too many questions, too many frightened looks from neighbors. I heard later she grew up to become some kind of animal doctor out east. And the second time," Marcus prompted when Thaddeus fell silent. The older man met his gaze directly. "My wife, Eleanor." This revelation stunned Marcus into silence. In the 2 years he had known Thaddeus, the man had rarely mentioned his late wife, and never in any detail. Eleanor understood animals in a way that wasn't natural, or at least not what most folks would call natural, Thaddeus continued, his voice softening with remembered affection. Birds would come when she called. Deer would eat from her hand. Even the most skittish creatures would stay calm in her presence. "What does it mean?" Marcus asked finally. "This gift, ability, whatever it is, where does it come from?" Thaddeus set his glass down and leaned back in his chair. "There are things in these mountains that are older than human memory," he said carefully. "Things that most people have forgotten how to see, how to hear. But sometimes, rarely, a person is born who remembers. Or perhaps remembers isn't the right word. They're born with a door already open that the rest of us have locked and barred and forgotten exists." "A door to what?" "To the world as it really is," Thaddeus replied, "not divided into human and wild, civilized and natural, but whole, connected." He paused, studying Marcus's face. "Your Lily has such a door inside her. What you saw today was just the beginning." Marcus felt a chill despite the warmth of the hearth. "Is she in danger?" Thaddeus's expression grew grave. "Not from the animals. Never from them. But there are those who fear such gifts, who see them as threatening, and there are others who would seek to use them, to control them for their own purposes." "Others? What others?" Marcus demanded, a protective fire kindling in his chest. "Who would want to harm a baby?" "Not harm, necessarily," Thaddeus clarified. "But people fear what they don't understand, and power, even a power as gentle as communion with animals, attracts those who wish to possess it." Before Thaddeus could elaborate, a sharp tapping sound came from the window. Both men turned to see the raven perched on the sill, its dark eyes reflecting the firelight. "Ah," Thaddeus said, rising slowly. "I see you've been noticed." "That bird has been following me since it appeared at our cabin," Marcus explained, watching as Thaddeus approached the window. It was watching Lily. To Marcus's surprise, Thaddeus opened the window without hesitation. The raven hopped inside and fluttered to perch on the back of the chair Thaddeus had vacated. "This is no ordinary raven," Thaddeus said, resuming his seat. The bird cocked its head, regarding Marcus with what could only be described as evaluation. "What do you mean?" Marcus asked, fighting the urge to move away from the unnaturally behaved bird. "Ravens are messengers," Thaddeus explained, reaching out to gently stroke the glossy black feathers. The bird permitted the touch with regal tolerance. "They move between worlds, carrying information, warnings, sometimes prophecies." "You're talking about this like it's some kind of supernatural creature," Marcus said, struggling to reconcile Thaddeus's words with his understanding of reality. "What is supernatural but natural things we've forgotten how to see clearly," Thaddeus countered. "Our ancestors knew better. They understood that the boundary between the human world and the wild world is not fixed, but permeable. Some even learned to cross it." The raven made a soft, throaty sound, almost like speech. "It wants something," Marcus observed, unable to shake the feeling that the bird was not just present but actively participating in their conversation. "It wants you to understand," Thaddeus replied, "before it's too late." "Too late for what?" Thaddeus exchanged what appeared to be a meaningful glance with the raven before turning back to Marcus. "The gift your daughter possesses is awakening during a significant time. The old ones call it the convergence, a period when the barriers between worlds grow thin. It happens rarely, perhaps once every several centuries." What worlds? Marcus asked, feeling increasingly out of his depth. What are you talking about? The world of humans, the world of animals, and the world of those who are neither. Thaddeus raised a hand to forestall Marcus's questions. I know how this sounds. If I hadn't seen it with my own eyes over the years, I wouldn't believe it either. Marcus took a deep breath, trying to ground himself in rationality, even as the day's events had shown him that rationality might have its limits. What does this mean for Lily? For our family? It means you have choices to make, Thaddeus said gravely. Your daughter has been recognized by forces most people never encounter. The Raven's presence proves that. You can try to ignore it, to pretend today was nothing more than a strange coincidence. But I warn you, that path leads only to greater danger. Or, Marcus prompted, or you can accept what is happening and learn to protect her. Guide her, help her understand her gift as she grows. How? Thaddeus smiled faintly. That's where I come in. Eleanor taught me much before she passed, and there are others who can help. People who maintain the old knowledge, who remember the proper relationship between humans and the natural world. The Raven suddenly took flight, circling the room once before landing on Thaddeus's shoulder. It bent its head close to the old man's ear, making a series of soft sounds that were eerily similar to whispered words. Thaddeus's expression changed, growing more serious. There's something else, he said after the bird fell silent. Something urgent. The Raven says there are strangers in the forest. Men who seek the child with the open door. Marcus stood abruptly. Clara and Lily are alone at the cabin. I need to get back to them. Wait, Thaddeus cautioned, rising as well. You mustn't go alone. These men, they're not ordinary hunters or hikers. They belong to an organization that has sought people like Lily for generations. What organization? Who are they? They call themselves the Boundary, Thaddeus explained grimly. They believe the separation between humans and the natural world must be maintained at all costs. Throughout history, they've eliminated those who threaten that separation. Cold fear gripped Marcus's heart. Are you saying these people would hurt a baby? My baby? They would see her gift as a contamination, a breach in the wall they've dedicated themselves to maintaining, Thaddeus confirmed. In their minds, they're protecting humanity from what they perceive as dangerous influence. This is insane, Marcus muttered. But even as he spoke, the memory of Lily's connection with the bears rose in his mind. If he hadn't seen it himself, wouldn't he also find such a story unbelievable? Threatening, even. The Raven launched from Thaddeus's shoulder and flew to the open window, looking back expectantly. We should follow, Thaddeus said, reaching for a worn leather jacket hanging by the door. From a chest near the entrance, he retrieved what looked like an ancient rifle, its woodstock polished by decades of handling. Is that necessary? Marcus asked, eyeing the weapon. I pray it won't be, Thaddeus replied, checking the mechanism with practiced hands. But the Boundary does not hesitate to use force when they believe their cause requires it. Together, they left the cabin, following the Raven as it led them along a narrow path that wound through the trees. Instead of heading directly toward Marcus's home, however, the bird led them on a circuitous route that skirted the edge of the deeper forest. Where is it taking us? Marcus whispered, aware suddenly of how silent the woods had become. No birdsong, no rustling of small creatures in the underbrush. Only the soft sound of their own footsteps and the occasional call of the Raven, urging them forward. A safer approach, Thaddeus murmured. The Raven sees what we cannot. As they moved deeper into the forest, Marcus became aware of subtle changes in their surroundings. The trees here were older, more massive than those near the town, Moss grew thick on their northern sides, and strange fungi, some glowing faintly even in the afternoon light, sprouted from fallen logs. The air felt different too, somehow heavier with moisture and fragrant with unfamiliar scents. The raven led them to a small clearing where a stream bubbled over smooth stones. There, it landed on a low-hanging branch and waited. "Why have we stopped?" Marcus asked, anxiety for his family building with each passing moment. Thaddeus raised a hand for silence, his head tilted as if listening to something beyond human hearing. After a long moment, he nodded. "We're not alone," he said softly. As if summoned by his words, a figure emerged from the shadows on the opposite side of the clearing. For a disorienting moment, Marcus couldn't determine if he was looking at a man or a woman. The figure seemed to shift subtly depending on how the light fell across it. "Thaddeus Dawson," the figure spoke, its voice neither definitively male nor female. "Ah, it has been many seasons since you sought counsel." "Nemean," Thaddeus acknowledged with a respectful nod. "I wouldn't disturb you if the need weren't great." The figure, Nemean, stepped further into the clearing. As it moved into clearer view, Marcus struggled to focus on its features, which seemed to blur and change when viewed directly. "The child with the open door," Nemean said, turning its attention to Marcus. "You are her father." It wasn't a question, but Marcus found himself nodding anyway. "My daughter, Lily." "The Boundary has sent hunters," Nemean stated. 3 entered the forest at dawn. They bear instruments of iron and silver, and their hearts are closed to the old ways. "We need to warn Clara," Marcus insisted, turning to Thaddeus. "We need to get to them before these hunters do." "Your mate and child are not unprotected," Nemean said, raising a long-fingered hand. "The Guardians were called when the child first demonstrated her gift." "Guardians?" Marcus questioned. "What Guardians?" In answer, Nemean made a fluid gesture toward the stream. The water's surface rippled, then stilled, becoming mirror-smooth despite the current. In its reflection, Marcus saw not the overhanging trees but an image of his own cabin. Clara was visible through the window, moving about the kitchen while Lily played in a small enclosure nearby, and surrounding the cabin, barely visible among the trees and underbrush, were shapes, animal shapes. A massive bear that Marcus recognized as Luna, the mother from the mill incident, sat watchfully at the edge of the forest. Near her, a pack of wolves lay in relaxed alertness under the shadow of a large oak. Birds of various species perched in the trees, their formations too orderly to be natural. "They came of their own accord," Nemean explained, observing Marcus's stunned expression. "Drawn by the child's awakening, they will prevent the boundary hunters from approaching openly." "But they're just animals," Marcus protested, even as he recalled how very unanimal-like the Luna's behavior had been at the mill. Against armed men. "They are not just anything," Nemean corrected, a hint of reproof in its fluid voice. "They are the first Guardians, the oldest alliance, and they are more than sufficient to keep watch until you return." The image in the stream shifted, showing 3 men moving through a different section of the forest. They wore modern hiking clothes but carried themselves with the alert precision of military training. Each wore a pendant of what appeared to be silver, shaped into a symbol that resembled a wall or barrier. They carried packs and what looked like specialized equipment, though from the distorted reflection, Marcus couldn't make out details. "The boundary hunters seek a direct approach to your dwelling," Nemean observed, "but the forest will not make their path easy." Even as the strange being spoke, Marcus saw the underbrush in the reflection thicken almost imperceptibly before the men, forcing them to alter their course. A deadfall that hadn't been there moments before blocked an obvious route, requiring a detour that led them subtly away from the direction of the cabin. "The forest itself is responding to Lily?" Marcus asked, struggling to absorb this new reality. "The old growth remembers," Nimian replied. "Trees have longer memories than any human. They recall a time when the boundaries between worlds were fluid, when your kind and ours lived in balanced awareness of each other." "Your kind?" Marcus looked more closely at the figure before him, suddenly understanding that he was in the presence of something, someone, not human in any conventional sense. Nimian smiled, the expression somehow both familiar and utterly alien. "We have been called many names by your people over the centuries: Fae, spirits, the hidden folk. The truth is both simpler and more complex than your legends suggest." "What do these boundary hunters want with my daughter?" Marcus asked, forcing himself to focus on the immediate threat rather than the existential questions that Nimian's presence raised. "To close the door within her," Nimian answered, all trace of smile vanishing. "They have methods, cruel ones, developed over centuries of hunting those born with the gift. If they succeed, the child's connection to the wider world would be severed. Often, the process damages other aspects of the one they treat. Some lose the ability to speak, to feel emotion, to form human connections." Horror filled Marcus at these words. They would destroy everything that makes her Lily. In their understanding, they would be saving her from corruption, Nimian said. Their conviction is absolute, though misguided. "How do we stop them?" Marcus demanded, looking between Nimian and Thaddeus. "How do we protect her?" Thaddeus turned to Nimian. "The convergence approaches. The gift awakening in a child so young. At this particular time, it cannot be coincidence." Nimian inclined its head in agreement. "The pattern unfolds as it must. But knowing this does not solve the immediate danger." The raven, which had been silent until now, suddenly gave a harsh call. Nimian looked up sharply. "The hunters have changed course," the being said. "Something has drawn their attention, something powerful enough to override the forest's misdirection." With a flick of its wrist, Nimian dispelled the image in the stream. "You must return to your dwelling now, Marcus Bennett. Take the old trail that follows the ridgeline. It will be quicker than the path you know." "What about you?" Marcus asked, already turning to leave. "And the hunters?" "Thaddeus will accompany you," Nimian replied. "As for the hunters—" Something ancient and dangerous flickered in the being's shifting features. "I will ensure they become temporarily lost." "Thank you," Marcus said, meaning it despite the surreal nature of the interaction. Nimian's expression softened slightly. "Your child's gift honors the old ways. In protecting her, you protect something precious that the world has nearly forgotten. Go now." With a final nod to the mysterious being, Marcus and Thaddeus hurried from the clearing, the raven flying ahead to guide their way. As they followed the ridgeline trail, a path Marcus had never noticed despite his familiarity with the area, Thaddeus filled in more of what Marcus needed to know. "The boundary has existed for centuries," the older man explained as they moved swiftly through the trees. "They began during a time when fear of the wild was at its height, when forests were seen as places of danger and corruption, rather than sources of life and balance." "And they've been hunting people like Lily all this time?" Marcus asked, ducking under a low-hanging branch. "How have I never heard of this?" "They operate in secret, and their methods ensure their activities remain hidden," Thaddeus replied grimly. "Mysterious disappearances, unexplained illnesses that change a person's personality or abilities, children who suddenly become withdrawn or lose their apparent imaginary friends. Many of these could be traced to the boundaries work if one knew what to look for. How do you know so much about them? Thaddeus was silent for several strides before answering. Eleanor and I had a daughter, he said finally, his voice heavy with old grief. Sarah. She had her mother's gift, even stronger perhaps. When she was 6, men came to our home while I was at work. They identified themselves as representatives from a special school for gifted children. Eleanor, sensing something wrong, refused them. The next day, they returned with official-looking papers. When Eleanor still refused, He paused, visibly collecting himself. They took Sarah by force. By the time I got home, it was too late. Marcus felt a cold anger building alongside his fear. What happened to her? We searched for months. The authorities were no help. The papers the men had produced seemed legitimate to them. Finally, with help from beings like Nimian, we tracked her to a facility in the mountains of Colorado. When we found her, Thaddeus's voice broke. She was alive, but the light was gone from her eyes. She didn't recognize us, didn't speak, didn't respond to anything. The door within her hadn't just been closed, it had been walled up, along with most of what had made her Sarah. My God, Marcus whispered, his pace quickening with renewed urgency. And these are the people hunting Lily. Yes, but things are different now, Thaddeus said, a fierce determination in his weathered face. The awakening of your daughter's gift during the approach of the convergence has stirred forces that have been dormant for generations. The animals responding, Nimian involving itself directly, these are signs that the old alliances are reforming. They crested a rise, and Marcus saw their cabin in the small clearing below. True to Nimian's words, the property was surrounded by wildlife. Not just Luna and the wolves he had glimpsed in the stream's reflection, but more animals than he would have thought possible to gather in one place without conflict. Deer and foxes, badgers and raccoons, even creatures that should have been natural enemies, all maintaining a respectful distance from each other as they formed a living perimeter around the cabin. I've never seen anything like this, Marcus breathed as they began their descent toward the cabin. No living person has, Thaddeus agreed. Not for centuries, at least. The last recorded instance of such a gathering was during the Great Convergence of 1642, according to Eleanor's family records. As they approached, Luna the bear lifted her massive head, acknowledging their presence with a rumbling sound that was neither threatening nor entirely welcoming, simply aware. The wolves shifted, making a path for the men to cross their line, then closed ranks behind them. The front door of the cabin opened before they reached it, and Clara stood in the doorway, Lily in her arms. Her expression was a mixture of relief and wonder. "They've been arriving all afternoon," she said, as Marcus embraced her and Lily. "At first, I was terrified. A bear, Marcus, right in our yard. But then I realized they're guarding us, guarding Lily." "You're safe," Marcus assured her, kissing Lily's forehead. "That's what matters." Inside, they gathered in the small living room. Thaddeus took a seat by the window, positioning himself to keep watch on the forest beyond. The raven perched on the back of his chair, its dark eyes alert. "Marcus told me about your gift," Clara said to Thaddeus after Marcus had explained everything he had learned. "About your wife and your daughter. I'm so sorry."